Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast, celebrating filmmaking, storytelling and cinema across the island of Ireland. In today's podcast, we're delighted to partner with the Dinard British and Irish Film Festival. The 36th edition has just taken place last weekend in Dinard. In a few moments, we'll be in conversation with Myrid Carten about her documentary A Wanton Her, which screened at the festival last Saturday and is about to hit cinemas today. But first, our contributor Tanvi Guhwale catches up with filmmaker John Kelly. His animated short Retirement Plan has just won the Jury and Audience Award at South by Southwest and has just screened at Dinard.
I'm going to start at the very beginning. I wanted to ask if you had a specific moment, maybe in childhood or your teenage years, where you realized that storytelling was for you and something that stayed with you.
I think the first time I became aware of a director being a thing, so I'm a little bit younger than my three siblings. There's sort of a 6-year gap. And the lovely thing about that was they would sort of drip feed me all the music, all the films, everything to watch. And so I would come home from school and find a videotape that they'd rented and watched the previous night. And one of them was Full Metal Jacket, Stanley Kubrick. And I think I watched that probably a little bit too young. I think I'd probably seen some kind of black and white war movies, but I'd never seen anything like this. And there's sort of scenes in there that just seem to last forever. I haven't watched it since, actually. I'm kind of afraid to watch it since, but it really made an impact on me because I just became aware. Not that anything I've ever done is remotely close to that, but it just made me aware of this idea of a storyteller and a director and this voice behind a story.
I know you've also had a career in commercials. So how do you think that shaped you and what felt different when you were working on the short?
Yeah, I mean, working in commercials is a brilliant training ground. It forces you to have a certain humility and to work alongside other people. You're kind of also forced to have a few sort of ego deaths along the way. But I have kind of tried to use every commercial I've done to try and push myself forward a little bit. That's either, learning something new or working with a particular crew member I really want to work with, or trying to develop kind of skills to kind of direct actors or work in different mediums. It can be frustrating, and it can, that kind of project-based structure can kind of, often you'll be pitching on things, and sometimes you can be pitching for 4 or 5 months and not get anything, and it can be very frustrating, but it's a lot of fun, and you make a lot of contacts that you can use along the way. So, for example, the person that was Gary Kern at Outer Limits, he was the colorist on this short film. I've also worked with him on a few commercials, so it helps in that regard as well.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the visual elements and the world that you've built in this short. I wanted you to elaborate a little bit about the design process and how everything came through.
Yeah, so a lot of my work in the past is very mixed media and a little bit, slightly headless chicken. So I do a lot of stop motion, and I do a lot of puppetry and live action and all this sort of stuff. And I've been fortunate to have huge amount of varieties. Like the first actor I ever directed was George Clooney in a commercial for the UN. But whenever I draw myself, it's always in a very simple style, and no one ever really sees it apart from anyone that sees my storyboards. And with this film, I kind of wanted to put some parameters on the approach visually, because I think it's like simultaneously the best and worst thing about animation is that anything is possible. If you want to make a dragon talk, or if you want to make a film about robots or ants or that sort of stuff. So I think I deliberately forced myself to put some restraints on it. And so that's why the film kind of feels weirdly like I took the approach of a lo-fi documentary, really, and influenced by a deadpan photography and portrait photography, where it's literally just, straight front on, no moving camera unless it's absolutely necessary. And if there's obstacles in the way, like doorways, just put them in there. So, with the intention that it would feel kind of a bit more observational. But I also think there's something about a really simple style that as an audience allows you a way in. And if this was a hyper realistic CG film, I don't know, there's and you see every hair and follicle on the character, it's a little harder sometimes to project yourself.
I'm working as a producer's assistant and I often work with animators, and they often tell me this one thing which you've said, like sometimes simplicity is better. So I think it's completely true in this case as well.
Yeah. And I think it's like, because I knew it wanted to have some emotional appeal and, or, kind of have some emotional depths to it. And sometimes I'm guilty with animation. It's very easy to overwork stuff so that you lose the humor sometimes, or I mean, obviously there's amazing examples of incredible animators that are able to do it, but I just knew in a kind of a limited time frame and limited sort of constraints that we were working with that we needed to simplify, and it couldn't be this kind of big giant showreel piece that.
I think it also comes out very authentic that way. Completely agree.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. The authenticity, maybe is also like another example of that was originally I was thinking when I came up with the idea and wrote it with Tara, was that we'd set it in America, because because it's animation, you can set it in anywhere you want. And all my kind of film frame of reference is like amazing cinematic American stuff. But an early decision was to make it, encouraged by Screen Ireland, actually, to just set it in Ireland. And I think it was one of the best decisions because it does make it more authentic. It does make it more personal because he's going to the cafes and the swimming spots that I go to.
I read that the story was inspired from a panic attack. So could you tell me how it started from there and where to the storyboarding process, if I may?
Yeah, a panic attack. It is true. It probably sounds a bit more dramatic than it was. It was literally just the kind of moment. I had the same realization that the character in the film has, which is that I realized I wouldn't have enough time in the rest of my life for all the things I wanted to do. Now we're sort of drowned with things to do. The internet and social media and everything else just provides you with endless options for your time, competing for your time in a way that I don't know if we're really prepared for as a species, And so that's why a lot of people, certainly me, feel kind of overwhelmed. And then you put other elements into that, like, watching relatives grow older and watching your own kids grow up and trying to achieve happiness through action-based solutions. Like, oh, if I buy a house, I'll be happy. Or if I get a garden, I'll be happy. Or if I do a yoga retreat, I'll be happy. And it's like, it's very solution-oriented culture we live in because we're being kind of fed these solutions. Like all my Instagram ads are like slippers and chair yoga. So I think a lot of that kind of fed into it. Tara and myself, my co-writer, and I wanted to come at it from as many angles as possible. We weren't trying to kind of bamboozle people, but I think there are definitely extrapolations of our own desires and our own fears and our own concerns, but also pulled in from other people and, what we're kind of feeling around us. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask how the experience of the co-writing was.
Yeah, Tara and I have kind of known each other for a long time and worked together. She's based in America, in New York, and I'm based in Dublin. But she works at an ad agency. She was a copywriter, and now she's like a CCO, so she's sort of running an agency now. But she's one of the funniest people I know, and just very kind of a similar sort of level of neurosis as myself, maybe. I hope she doesn't mind me saying. But she's also able to, we've written a few little scripts together before, and she's able to take like a rough idea that I have and just make it like 100 times better. And so with this, I kind of had it and I immediately thought of her. And because it's sort of a list film, it's really, it's a fairly simple structure. It's an easy one to work together on. And we actually laid it out in Google Sheets. So each list is in its own cell, which meant it's really easy to kind of reorganize and drop stuff in. And so together we made this giant list and then kind of collated it down. But I think what was kind of fun was like she's used to being a copywriter and kind of letting other people take inspiration from that and springboard into visuals. So a lot of the time I would be like, oh, I love what you said here about like I will move to a town by the sea. But maybe it would be fun if instead of it being literally a town by the sea, that he's arriving at a, retirement resting nursing home. So we're kind of subverting what you're seeing. And I think that was the most fun aspect of it, is taking the simple kind of structure and then seeing how you can start quite seaside. You're seeing exactly what the character's saying. And then as the character becomes more self-delusional towards, the end of the film, sometimes the two kind of fork and eventually he's clearly been completely delusional and you're watching something totally different to what he's talking about. That relationship was really fun to figure out.
To add to that, I think your friendship over the years also made it very easy for you to work together, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. She's not like me. She's kind of worked in advertising a bit and a lot actually, and she's not precious, so neither of us are afraid to be honest with each other and say what is working or what isn't working. But it's also just fun to have an excuse to have a Zoom call, with a friend. That's lovely.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the recognition, the awards that the short is getting. Your win at the South by Southwest is definitely a huge achievement. So what was the feeling like? And did you ever think that this short would get the recognition that it's getting?
No, not at all. No, not at all. I don't think you would have written this kind of film if you wanted to make awards or get awards, really. And I know from working in advertising, as soon as you start thinking about awards when you're making anything, you're almost certainly not going to get awards.
Yeah.
We just made this for us, which I know everyone says that, but we genuinely did. And we tried to make ourselves laugh. I mean, when we got Donal involved, certainly that made the horizons of our ambition, expand a little bit, because he's such an amazing name and an amazing actor and so well loved. But I could never imagine that it would do as well with kind of live action festivals. A really lovely thing is it seems to have kind of reached beyond animation festivals and is kind of resonating with wider audiences and being programmed in festivals alongside other live action films. But South by Southwest was amazing. I mean, we were a little bit tactical in that the funding came with a screening at Galway Film Fleadh, which is our world premiere. But then when you read online about how to premiere your film, the international premiere is quite important. So we kind of sat on it for a little bit. And we did have interest from other festivals because of the funding, but we had to say no to a few festivals just because we wanted to wait for the right one. But that meant that it was actually 8 months between our first two screenings, but it sort of paid off because South by Southwest went so well, and that became such a good springboard for the project. I'm not sure if I'd recommend it to everyone because it is so risky. And even a distributor I spoke to was like, be really careful because your film's going to be too old soon, before we found out about South by Southwest. Yeah, it's a little bit of a dice roll.
To sort of conclude, I wanted to ask, stepping away from the short, like what drives you most as a director and what kind of stories do you see yourself telling in the future?
Yeah, I mean, when I approached Donal, I said, I want to make animation that my wife would like to watch.
Yeah.
Which is like a very, glib way of putting it. But I do believe that there's an audience out there for animation for adults that isn't being really made at the moment. There's a lot of adult animation, but it's mostly kind of sitcoms, things like Bob's Burgers, which are great. But I think I believe there's like an audience for more sophisticated storytelling within animation, and you don't see it that much apart from short films. And so that kind of interests me a lot. And a lot of the films and things that I've been writing have been in that area. And also animated documentary. I think I just got commissioned by Screen Ireland for an animated documentary short.
That's lovely. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's coming out next summer. It's about the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me when I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning with a rat on my chest, and then spent the most intense 3 hours of my life. And I chased it out of our bedroom, me and my wife. It happened about 10 years ago, and I've thought about it ever since. So I'm going to, instead of doing therapy, I'm going to make a short film instead.
Thank you so much for being here.
But thank you so much for having me, Tanvi.
Now we are really delighted to welcome Myrid to talk to us about A Want in Her, which again is in cinemas, so make sure you catch it if you can. But first, have a listen to the trailer here.
I saw her. I knew straight away it was Mommy because of the heels.
She's been missing 8 days now.
She'd been sleeping rough.
I just started losing grip of reality.
What should I do about Mommy? I used to live in here. Yeah.
No, Myrid, stop.
Mary, stop filming, please.
You bitch. This isn't a film. This is true life.
Do you think this house is haunted? A lot happened with the family.
Where there's a will, there's a war. God knows what the retribution will be.
Did you find?
Do you know them doing a film about you?
Yeah, you told me that once now.
By me and Sean are tattoo Ray Lacanchum.
Myrid, I'm really breaking my heart here.
Look up at the sky. It's as blue can be.
So thanks so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for talking with me.
So this is such a beautiful and personal and complex and very different film. And before we get into this and go through the nuts of this, I was just wondering if you could talk to me about yourself, your journey as an artist to this point.
Right, yeah, thank you for the comments. And my journey as an artist, I suppose, I don't know where exactly to start without it taking for ages.
And I like that though. That's part of it.
And I think in some ways it kind of started in the film. You see these mini TV tapes and material that I started shooting when I was 10. And I do think that time was really the seeds of me becoming an artist. I'd moved up to Donegal fully. I'd always partially lived there on weekends with my grandmother, but we moved up when I was about 8, 9, and we had this amazing matriarch of a teacher who had been Miss Donegal in the 1970s, and she was always encouraging us to do a little drama, in Gaelic, or do creative writing. And all the people, it was a tiny school, there's only 30 of us in the whole school. A lot of the girls in my class had gone on to be creative and be artists. Like Morgana, the singer, is one of my oldest friends. She was in the class. Maureen Butler, who is on TG Cara and Ross Naroon and does her own presenting. She was in my class as well. So we're talking about, there was about 4 people in my class. So that was the seedlings of it. And then I got more into visual art whenever I went to secondary school.
And at that point, did you kind of see maybe a sensitivity in you and your friends that you'd sort of feel the world in a different way, or like even the act of acting or performance or that creativity, like it's something like you're interpreting it?
Yeah, I think it was growing up in Donegal as well, where you have this strange dichotomy. I suppose it's anywhere in rural Ireland, especially the West, where the weather was so unforgiving at times. So you're constantly housebound, but it was so inspiring and so beautiful and magical. But you were often housebound, and we were watching Nickelodeon all the time. So you had these like influences coming in, and you'd have to play games in the house, and it was quite limited in some ways. You had this big expansive imagination because of what you were surrounded by, but at the same time we were bored a lot. And I actually think a lot these days that people in general, I know myself and I think children, but we never allow ourselves to be bored. And actually boredom is one of the best things for creativity. You know, if I was sitting at a bus stop, I look at my phone, still looking around me, and it's something I struggle with daily. But that boredom was really part of our existence. And that sense from, I mean, everybody always has, I think if you're an artist, you have teachers along the way and mentors along the way who've been really fundamental. And she was probably the first one, because she just seemed to love the drama and, you know, getting us to write essays all the time. And it was how we did process things, because whenever September the 11th happened, I was 10, and like we had to write 2 essays about it. I remember that the creative stories I wrote about it, one was I was inside the plane, one I was inside the building. They were both love stories. Like we had to process the news through this creative lens. These tapes that I discovered, you know, the girls, there was only 2 dramas on there. I didn't remember filming them. The girls were doing this domestic drama about Paddy coming home drunk and his wife getting water, all in Gaelic, and the boys were doing the trial of Osama bin Laden, all in Gaelic, which I thought was quite an interesting, you know, female v male perspective, this domestic scene versus this political scene. But that obviously that was what was happening at the time. So that was really one of the first things. And then my family are very culturally, like, well, my mother is very into films and art, and so is my father, is very into history and reading. And I was kind of encouraged to, you know, do what you love and you won't work a day in your life, was one of the things my father said to me. And so when I went to secondary school and realised that I had some aptitude for visual art as opposed to just literature, because it's very focused on literature and drama in Donegal, I decided to go to I would go to London to do art. But I always wanted to be a filmmaker. My mother told me, you should do an art course because artists make more interesting work. I'm sure she rused the day that she said that. And she became the subject of my work. But that was a big, I always wanted to go to film school afterwards, and that didn't happen, but that was the route I wanted to take.
Yeah. And the whole time, are you sort of trying out different languages and different ways of expression? Like, were there moments or bits along the way that you're like either struggling or then, you know, like getting pushback, but then finding something really powerful in it?
Yeah, and I think that's how I came to this work about my family. Like, well, I ended up going to Goldsmiths, and I really liked painting at the time, and then I think they actually accepted me because I was making massive sculptures. I was welding when I was 19, and I think they thought, who's this girl making these giant, these very ambitious metal sculptures? And as soon as I rocked up to the course, great, one of the best tutors I've ever had, he sort of recognized straight away that it was film I wanted to do, and he was like, why are you, like, just take a camera? But their whole model, I think it's an amazing art school, and as someone who lectures a bit now in art, I always think about that model. But it was really, they said, think through making was the first thing they said to me whenever I arrived. I was so nervous. I had imposter syndrome. I thought I shouldn't have been there, really. And I was so worried about what the idea would be. But there was this sense, just start, like, follow your instinct, and that the rest will fall into place. And just do work, and then we have something to work with. Like, do the material, and then we have something to work with. And then that's their first year. You're really being encouraged to take risks. And then in the second year, you're given a tutor who's going to challenge you. And I remember she said, she was actually Irish, and she said to me, I was making quite surreal work at the time, or symbolic, and she said, like, this isn't real. Like, this isn't real. Like, what about politics? Was her thing. What about politics? And then I went home for Christmas that year, and my uncle Danny, who's in the feature, he came to visit us, and I had gotten this camera for Christmas, and it was like a Canon 60D. It was what I wanted, and DSLR. And he came in and he started chatting about his wife Miriam, and the most engaging story about how they met when they were children and all, like very authentic. But actually, she was a fixed hallucination. She didn't exist. But this story was so truthful, and so I actually thought, well, I can. Now I started to ask my mother about his Miriam. I didn't know that much about it. I knew she wasn't real, but like, was there a Miriam, etc. And then I started to ask my mother about her own psychosis. And I ended up doing the first piece of work that felt like me. Like, it felt like, oh, I found something here. And it was really partly fueled by this pushing that I'd had and this challenging I'd had around the political and the real and real life. And then I was sort of using this piece to say, well, real life itself is not always objective and concrete. So that and then I kind of parked the family work for a while, because that great tutor said to me, you don't need to do this now. You're only 21, and this is probably like the most significant topic of your whole life. Like, why don't you wait until you're in your 50s, or have some more life experience before you tackle this? Which was really a generous act, because the material was so rich, So some people wanted me to, or I was encouraged. I got good feedback, but I think he gave me an out. So I thought, yeah, I'm going to park this. But then when my mother's siblings started dying when I was 28, I realized, no, I have to do this now, because there's a time element, and it felt like that there was something happening with that generation. There's almost a domino effect where one of her siblings was passing away after the other. So that's when I pick up my camera again with my family.
As you were kind of going through this, are you picturing an end? And is there ever a point where it just gets too much? Or is it a way to help you process?
I mean, there's no easy answer. I hate saying that, actually.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've been saying that a lot in these interviews. I suppose, obviously, it is helping me process something, because often in those situations, like, one of the prevailing heavinesses is the sense that it's meaningless or it's purposeless, that it has no purpose. And it's just chaotic, and there's nothing you can do. And I suppose in some ways I was able to counteract that by the fact that I was trying to make sense of something, and that I was, these things that have happened in the film happen in different guises at different times. But in this particular time, I was very much aware that I was making a work, or making a film, and that it was material. And that gave me a different relationship to what was going on. But when I started out, I thought I was making a different film to what the film ended up being. And then I was very much following a very intuitive way of working, because I was thinking about this actually this morning around the editing. I was almost editing that Cinema Verte stuff a month after filming it, like really, like in the process of filming it. I was cut like this, the opening with my uncle. I cut together this scene, which was 13 minutes, which was kind of what happened there, and then my mother going missing. I was literally cutting almost as it was happening, and I knew I wanted to do I knew I wanted it to be a feature. So around 2020, I cut a 60-minute cut, and most of the story had happened from the summer of 2019 to March 2020, actually. So it was quite a short amount of time. It was about from August to March. It was the amount of time that the most of the things really happened. So that was was quite condensed, and I was just editing it as I went. And then I basically would go back, there was a repetition that happened. I was able to do pickups, and I went, and the edit took a very long time because all this other material started to come in that started to cloud the time period, which was the hardest element of the piece, because the cinema verite stuff was like, it's almost a bit chronological in some ways. So that, and I didn't have an idea. I didn't know I had a film until in March 2020. A particular phone call happened that I realized this is like, I need to make this film now. And that became one of the motivating factors, was I felt like this material deserved a film. I knew I wanted to make a film anyway, but I was very unclear about what the structure would be or what it would entail. And then when this phone call happened, I knew, okay, this needs to be the climax of the film. I was actually reading John Yorke's Into the Woods at the time. There's obviously so many books on structure and drama. That just happened to be the one I had, and that really helped me piece together the 60-minute cut that I did. But I knew that, oh, this has to come 3/4 through the films, or that I was actually quite structured in that way. But I didn't realize that the mini DVs were coming. Maybe I had some inclination somewhere very deep down, but they didn't really come in until after I'd done that cut. The only stuff in that cut was the observed stuff and the house shots. I'd already done them because I knew I wanted the house to be a character in the film. But then, and some 16mm of the house as well. That was what I thought was my material. Then the mini DV stuff came in, and then the art school stuff, which was so difficult to work with. And that was the hardest thing to crack, really. And partly the art school stuff was about me as a character, like Myrid as a character in the film, and how does she have an arc and not just land at this point in the phone call, etc. So I think I loved learning about drama and structure. I think it's so rich, and that's what I want to learn more about. And that was giving me a lot of creative fuel and interesting collaborations.
And because I do want to talk then a little bit about like Tig's role, and and then building everything together and then doing test screens. But I think what I would like to do, because I think it's at the heart of this, is to go, like, I know other documentarians that when they watch their work, if it's something that they could visually see that it's so stressful to them, there is a thing. And when your mum, she was describing when it happened, like when she started processing the death of her mum, and like before she said the words 2 years, right? That was in my head watching it, because it was like, it takes 2 years after trauma, even if you're doing the best that you can, I think, to like understand it. Do you know, like, for your body to like, and your brain to kind of like catch up to what has happened and what that means. And I think there's something that is like, this material is so intense. You're molding something, but it's so raw. Like, and my thing is, like, we actually all do this as artists, but like, I'll have the luxury to go, that's a character. Do you know, like, all that horrible thing that's happening on the page, like, that's not me. Her name is Emma, and she lives in Mayo. Like, there's that like level of like, it is there, and it is painful. And I'm just wondering, like, your own sort of physicality and feelings and relationship to being immersed in something, or is it helping? Is it cathartic, or are there beats where it's sort of overwhelming?
I think it's really interesting what you're saying, because I think there's something around trauma. I'm really reluctant to use the word trauma in general, because I feel like it's become so ubiquitous in this society. People are like, oh, I missed my train, it's so dramatic. But I do think there's trauma for me is about, or not for me, but there's something around shock with a trauma, like the shock of something being so I'm talking in particular because I've recently had one, not related to my mother, but the shock around where you start to see like the veil is lifted about how fragile life is essentially, and um that and your nerve endings are totally exposed. And maybe there's something partly why I have been able to make this film is because of the repetitive nature of my mother's disease and illness, is that there was not much this time around that was really shocking to me. Like, I remember one thing happening around the time in I think in 2021 where the after the period of the film when my mom was on the streets, they started to do these signs of safety meetings, which was a kind of amazing thing that the social workers were doing. They took my mother as a case study, and they would do these like monthly meetings where they had the housing executive, the night services, and it was during COVID as well. The social workers, all these different facilities, and they wanted me to come at one point, and I went a couple of times, and I find them really shocking and really emotional and like so hard because I started to get details of what was happening in her life in a way that whenever she is at that really horrible, like the worst place you can be, really, I would know. Like I was quite protected always because she basically there was always a sense that she would do that away from me and I wasn't too involved. So but I didn't put that in the film. I didn't record those. It would feel like it was totally inappropriate. I was very much about as well the like what was happening in the house and the family dynamic, not about social workers. But I remember being really ringing up my auntie and being super emotional after I was on a residency actually in Scotland, and she started in the phone call giving out about the other family members, very passionately, and then I was thinking, "Fuck, I should have recorded this." Because it felt relevant to the fact that, you know, all the stuff that was happening. And I felt like, and I was so emotional. I thought this actually, at one point, we needed in the film for me to be quite emotional. And I thought, I don't have that call. But that's just to say there was, like, I think I was quite clear sometimes on what was the film and what wasn't. And those things, like, there's only one scene in the film that I found really, one shot in the film that I found very difficult to work with, and it became quite a pivotal scene in many ways.
Is that the voice?
The bench shot, which obviously you start with the bench and the middle, and I found that was difficult to work with because I had done something. That was the first time I'd done what I'd done, and I felt quite shameful about it. And my editor, who I adore in many ways, but she's very blunt, and she was like, "Why did you do that?" So it was quite confronting material to work with, and I had to have a lot of conversations. I rang TAG about it. I rang friends outside of the film about it. And I really had to deliberate for about a week. So that was a raw experience. But most of the stuff that happens in the film was not, I would say, traumatic. It was hard, but it wasn't traumatic.
Yeah. I suppose what it is that subject matter is there and you're immersed for such a long, like if it's something that you're just sort of dealing with, that you can kind of take a step, go for a walk, but when it is, for a time, your job. Like I also was chatting to another actor and he had this really intense role and he was like, I actually had to stop acting for a couple of weeks because when it is authentic, when it is true in that way. And it's more about how, as artists, how do we protect ourselves or manage that? And what I would say is, because you kind of have to have access to it, but like, how do you put the boundaries in? And then I would say now that it's being seen, like, other people are bringing their emotions and their feelings to this and connecting to it in that work. And is that, like, is that another thing, or like, are you setting those boundaries? How is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was very intense working on the film, especially. I mean, you hear that as well. Like, and there's a certain call where I talk about, or voice note, I talk to someone about how my now husband says, this is your whole life. Your project's about you. I think it was very intense whenever, I'm editing this project or I was working on the project and things were still going on that had happened after the story time. So I'm dealing with two layers. But I tried to put that into the film itself. This idea, like my character in the film is sometimes working on projects around her mother and is getting these calls about her mother. So I channeled that in about um how there's a doubling going on there, and that it's also that you're trying to control. There's an element of putting people in their little boxes, putting them on monitors, trying to control them, editing them, running them over with a car, which I had one shot of doing that, and then how uncontrollable and chaotic they are on the outside, and how spilly and excessive and porous they are. Um, I I just think basically in this project I had a filmmaker hat and a daughter hat, and in the film you see that too, and it gives energy to certain scenes whenever the two of them clash, like on the bench scene. Um, but that was the way my life was on the outside. Like I had this, I was very, had this filmmaker role, and then I had this daughter role, and like there's so much apparatus around filmmaking, the pitches, the funding, the people, like there, it has a certain professionalism that actually is kind of quite useful. But I also didn't. The reason I don't say it was cathartic in some ways, I think it was a process, and for sure, but I don't think I could reach any wisdom or much wisdom or release or freedom from making films alone. I think filmmaking usually is a channel for, it helps you to document where you're at, but like I had to have a lot of support systems outside to deal with being the daughter. And sometimes it was difficult with them because they're so strong. I have such strong support systems outside. It was hard to find a Venn diagram of people who like I could talk to when I was in my daughter role about, well, I'm also making this film, without them being like, what the fuck, what's that? And then people in the film world, I don't want to spill all my emotional stuff onto. So I had to find a couple of people. I did find, thankfully, and I was very grateful for it, a couple of people who I engage as being the daughter of an alcoholic, but who were artists and who also might have made personal work, and then being able to have really good conversations with them. So that was incredibly helpful. That was just serendipity. And also I knew I had to find people who had relevant experience to me that would understand that. And then the second question, like around the response. Yeah, I said this in an interview recently, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but I heard someone saying that, parentified children are not very good at receiving things, be it criticism or praise. And I really relate to that. Like I'm constantly over sensitive to criticism, and so almost if I get praise, I'm just like, oh, thank God it's not criticism. But I'm not the easiest person at receiving it. So what's been useful is just to keep remembering that I did make this film because I wanted it to move other people, and I'm just trying to shepherd the film. And I know if people really ask me, they really need help, I know where I can point them. But I just wanted to make the film and for them to have their own experience with it. And I think that's going to happen more and more because I won't always be at the cues. As a film, it can go and travel the world and I don't have to be there. So, and they can have their own experience with it. And it's also the type of film, I think, that it does leave people sometimes quite dazed, or the ending is such a kind of, it's quite strong in some ways, and people have to take a while to just process the film. And that means that they don't, they might come up to me and just say that they were moved, but they just say that they don't have words, and that's okay. I mean, that's why I've made the film, because I didn't have words either.
You have made like something that is so deeply personal, and then it's out now, and it's about to kind of go out a little bit bigger. In terms of like sort of what people are asking of you, do you like, and I kind of think I think actors kind of go through the same thing a little bit. Like when you are there, it's almost like a viewer or like the press, like the likes of me or something, that they'd feel too much ownership to ask things that are too personal. Because that's why I was like, oh, look, I'll try and say like, this is just because it relates to your work, but this is your work. This is what we're here to talk about and how it has formed and why it has formed. But like that, then people might push it too far, or yeah, that it's. Do you feel like that has happened at any point?
I think there's a shift that seems to have happened, which is kind of interesting to me. It's my first film, so this is all new to me. Like even the distribution model, like I've learned so much on this film around the production side of things and all the way through to distribution. Feel unbelievably grateful that my dream was that it would have a cinema run, so this sort of cinema release is incredible. And I was quite, shocked in some ways because of the arty bits or, the experimental nature of it. But there has been a shift, a market shift, I would say, from whenever it went to IDFA and had all the press there. Like I did quite a lot of press there, to now this general cinema release, because there it was totally focused on really the filmmaking side of stuff. Like obviously the personal stuff is so intertwined, but it seemed like the lens was around the filmmaking, and now it's become more around the personal. Like so I've had interviews where recently, I won this weekend, probably my biggest interview in some ways because it was on RTE, but he didn't really ask hardly anything about the filmmaking, and that was interesting to me. And I think on reflection, it's it's a personal interest story. And I was raised on Coronation Street, Emmerdale, bit of EastEnders. My mom always thought EastEnders was too bleak. At least in Corey, there's a bit of humour, Like these were, and I think when I went into film, partly I always wanted to be a filmmaker, and not. I actually at the time when I was a teenager said I wanted to do films because they were popular culture. Like I didn't want. I liked art, but I wasn't brought up going to art galleries. Really, I was brought up on TV and films, and there's a class element to that too. And so, I've seemed to have brought together two things here into this film, and I understand that, of course. Yeah, most of the general public are going to be going because of the personal, intimate relationships that they can relate to. The art, me being an artist, might be interesting for the film, but it's not the main driver of their interest. So that's been interesting. It's just I'm more used to talking about the craft because, I went to art school and you spend most of the time just talking about work. And the person and I love writers. I love books and I love writers there's a couple of female writers I love, and I feel like they're writing very close to home. But they, as you said, Gwendolyn Riley, similar stuff happens in all of her books, similar dynamic with this father figure. The character's name is always an Irish, I don't know why, sort of like an Irish name that's long, that can be shortened. So like Aisling, who's called Ash or whatever. And, I sometimes troll because I am too interested in females' biography. I don't do it as much with men. I notice this. I'm like, what age is her husband? Because in the books, her husband is older. Oh, her husband in real life is older. Oh, I wonder if this is her. But I don't have that. Emer McBride as well. But I don't have that luxury, like it is me. And these are my family members. So there is a level, like you said, where there is a bit of me that sort of thinks you don't actually have to ask that many questions because most of it's there. So why do you want more? Really? But so far, people, even that interview on Saturday, it was more around the stuff in the film. It wasn't like he was asking me loads and loads of other stuff. Just a bit about my childhood that's not in the film, really. But I think I'm learning how to navigate that myself. As an actor, I'd say, stick to the script.
Yeah. So we'll go back. So I just think all those things were sort of thematically linked. So I wanted to keep them together. Now I want to go into like the nuts and bolts of the practicality. So when did you get your producers on board? Like when did you go from like documenting this to go, no, I'm packaging this, I'm putting this together, I'm editing this as a feature?
Well, it was very organic. So I basically got an Arts Council award in 2018, and it really changed my life.
The project award, is it?
No, it was the Next Generation.
Oh,
So
brilliant.
yeah, I didn't expect to get it. I feel like I would say this as well. Like any funding I've ever expected to get, I've not got, and anything I haven't expected to get, I've got. Is very weird, but I really didn't think I would get it, and then I got it, and partly they were encouraging, or this idea of having a mentor. So I reached out to Tag. I'd seen The Great Wall on Myrid, and I reached out to Tag. So he was my mentor during that year, and I'd applied to do it with this idea about finding my voice was the through line. And I said that one of the things I wanted to do was to look at, I called it Desi's Wedding at the time. I have an uncle, Desi, who's the only person I actually haven't recorded, my mother's side of the family. But they had these stories of growing up in Glasgow, and Desi's Wedding was one of them. And I kind of wanted to archive my mother's siblings and their stories because I'd always wanted to do that, and her sibling had passed away. So that was whenever I had this idea. Whenever her brother passed away, Michael, I rocked up to the funeral like with the camera, and I did for those couple of like that year. Sometimes went over to Glasgow and interviewed people about. I thought it was more about their childhood in Glasgow, but it started to become more about the feud. I suppose in some ways it's almost like, especially with this type of film, it is like The Onion, and you think you're doing this outer layer, but really you're going way more. It became more and more and more personal. The family feud and the inheritance feud of when my grandmother died was such a significant event in my life, a traumatic event in my mother's life. So they became more focused on that, and then eventually it became more about my mother and I's relationship, really. But whenever I was doing that, I thought I was writing these applications for I wrote an application for Docs. Doc Ireland started that year, and Tag would just he wasn't my producer at the time. He was just almost like a puppet master in the background. He was like, have you seen this festival happening in Belfast? And then I was like, no. And he's like, you should apply for the pitch and the marketplace. So I was like, okay. Now in the marketplace, you had to have a producer. My husband, who had directed a short and a feature in the 2010 to 14, he was had to step up to be my producer for these marketplace, which was again very things you have to do at times. He was very good, but so and for the pitch, he had to step up as my producer. So I had to get together an idea what the film was for that particular event, which was in June 2019. And then I ended up winning the pitch. And for that pitch as well, I basically I got Sean Mullen, great artist, filmmaker, up to the house, and we started thinking about the house as a character, and we did 116mm shoot. So we basically did three shoots. I had some interviews, I had the stuff of the house, and I had a 16mm of the house, and I used that to make a teaser for the pitch. I won the pitch, so I had £10,000 development money from any screen, and then I feel like. And the film's called No Place Like Home was the working title. And then I feel like all of the things were just in place for the madness that was about to ensue. Because then in August, my Uncle Danny showed up at my Uncle Kevin's house. And I just written all these application forms like, oh, the house was like a fort and it was under war and it was under siege. And then I was like, actually, it is actually under siege right now because Danny's just showed up and Kevin's ringing me and he's ringing the police. I was on the phone to Kevin saying, don't call the police until I get there. Don't call them. Yeah, I need to come up. And he's like, oh, why? I was like, I'm going to film. actually my car broke
And
down on the way.
it bookends it so well with the caravan. You're just like, it just
Exactly.
links it in so nicely. I'm not like, I won't say any more, but you're just like, wow, that you couldn't have planned that better. You couldn't have
I
written
know, I know. So that I meant August really was when the film really started. Like all of that interview material was almost research material. There's some of the shots of the house we used, but most of the stuff, I don't even know if we used any of the shots of the house because we went and reshot it again. But that was almost just like a research time. And then when Danny showed up, I started filming that, and it just became far more cinema verite. It wasn't talking heads. It was, and then Danny showed up in August, or I think it was the start of September. Actually, it was like the end of August, start of September. My mother went missing. I think it was October, November. My mother rocks up at the house in December. The phone call near the end is March. Like, I was just going back and forth to the house essentially. And then I edited together a lot of that material into that 60-minute cut for August 2020. And then I remember ringing Tag at the start of, and this was then obviously COVID as well. I rang Tag at the start of 2021. And he told me to apply for The Voice, I think, and he didn't need a producer, but he helped me get the application together. And then at the start of 2021, I remember ringing him and saying, like, I need a producer. Like, I don't know if I've heard back from The Voice or not, but I was like, I need a producer. Do you recommend anybody? And then he said, well, how would you feel about me being the producer? And I was like, interesting. And because he was always there and directing me about what to do, but he had never, as far as I was aware, he hadn't produced anything that wasn't his own work, or that he wasn't, the editor or the working with Fergal or this thing. So then we had a conversation, and he said, Roisin Garrity, and I'd met her at Docs Ireland pitch, and he said, because he was working on his own films, and he just said, I would need someone else to be like hands on the ground. And I really loved Roisin from the pitch and the marketplace in Docs Ireland. So that's how we got together. It was 2021, and I can't remember if I got the yes from The Voice by that stage or not. But that was really, the beginning of our working together, and it took a couple of years to get the funding. But I was always very lucky as well, because I was getting Arts Council grants every so often. That meant bursaries. That meant that I could still work on the project, and I got the Amy Commission that year to make a short film that was an offshoot of the feature, because they knew I was working on the feature and they wanted to help me, and they said, well, could you maybe make a short that was related to the feature? So I got to work with the editor, who had been all through the development with me, and we also made an actual teaser together, like a proper one, for The Voice, and that unlocked everything for us. Like, that's what I would say in terms of if anybody wanted to make a personal film, or a film that is basically the USP is the vision, then you have, like, that teaser was the thing that changed everything for us, really, because it started to show people, I sort of say it was just, you think your family's interested, is anybody else going to, is really the undertone of, like, as my auntie said to me, you're not Sinead O'Connor, like, you're just a nobody making a film about nobodies. So I had to show why this was different, or why it was watchable, and we did a 4-minute teaser. It was very intense, but it was very effective, and then people started to get on board.
And tell me about your festival experience now. So it just seems to have really taken on this life, going to so many different spaces. What has been have you gotten sort of energy back from people? Have you, do you tour with it that much?
Yeah, and I do want to say so, because obviously if there's a lot of filmmakers listening to this, like, I so many rejections at the start, like, not too many, but like, because people knew I wanted to work in fiction. Like Tad knew I want to work in fiction, so we were really trying. I think they which were trying, and we thought we had a chance of getting a premiere in a festival that was maybe like an A-list festival that also did fiction, and that was what we were going for at the beginning. So it was a bit disheartening, especially because like sometimes it reminds me of that Stephen King story he talks about where when he was a young writer, he used to just get the rejection letters just to get more and more elaborate, better. He'd pen up his rejection letters. In the start, it was like, thanks for the entrance. And then he would get these like very personal letters. And like by the end, we were getting like these like sometimes amazing festivals like sending like why they love the film so much, but like sorry they couldn't take it. And I was like, what? But so that was part of it, like dealing with the rejection, having to keep the faith, because I knew I took in so many risks in the filmmaking, and I had been quite determined that I wanted to make a particular type of film. So then when I got these rejections, I had to keep the faith. And I think one of the things
on the outside, like that's on the inside. On the outside, it just seems to have done very well and gone to the interesting places. So that's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, no, because well, IDFA was the bigger, like we wanted IDFA if it was a purely documentary festival, and it was like, so I was delighted, and I'd obviously gone to competition there as well. And the one thing I would say about all of that, again, it was my first experience, and I had a really good relationship with IDFA from all the development stuff that I'd done. I'd done the project space, I'd done the IDFA producers connection. And it actually made total sense for the film to premiere there. It was the right place for it. And and it also has the best cinemas. I've actually gone to IDFA more than any other festival in the world, apart from maybe Ducks in Ireland. But the cinemas there are incredible, and it showed like one of the premiere was in my favorite cinema in the world, the Jasinski, I don't know how to say it properly, but like this Art Nouveau dream of a cinema. I just adore it. So it was meant to be, and I think I just, in hindsight, Kierkegaard says life has to be lived forward and understood backwards. And it was just, we thought, wouldn't it be incredible to go to Venice or Cannes or whatever? But actually, it wasn't right for the film. And one of the things that was a surprise to me, and it was such an amazing surprise, is I didn't really think that much about press. I don't know why. I think I was just so focused on, the premiere and the tickets and what I'd wear and my ma being there and all of this sort of stuff. So then when we started to get and we had an amazing PR woman, but when we started to get the press coming back in the reviews, it was a real shock to me. Like they were so good, and also it seemed as though it became a film that people talked about. Even in Amsterdam, they would say the top 3 films you have to go and see at this festival, which I never expected. So it was really amazing. And then but then I was pregnant at the time. I was 6 months pregnant, and I don't think I went to any other festivals. The only festivals I went to were IDFA Dublin when I was 38 weeks pregnant, so 2 weeks before I was due, and that was kind of it, really. Because of the pregnancy, I couldn't travel, I couldn't tour with it, but I did a lot of Zoom Q&As.
Yeah, and sort of now you're sort of, it's going to be released. It's going to be, a lot more people will see it. Have you started thinking about what's next? Like what area that you want to go into? Drama specifically? Is there, what would you see yourself as the stories that you'd like to tell?
Yeah, well, I think Pedro Costas says you never tell anybody what your next film is because it's a gift, and you wouldn't tell them what a gift is. But I definitely I can see, looking back on the films that I love, there's a very clear arc around there's always a female protagonist. There's always a sense of loss. There's something impenetrable about the character. They go on a journey to find themselves, rah rah. But I also think that the next project I want to do is around, at the minute anyway, I think is around a a woman who ends up in a very different place from where she began, and who a fallen woman in some ways, a complicated woman. And I'm looking at, I think I do want to move into fiction, but I also really am excited about the hybrid form. I think there's a lot of things I discovered in this film that I think I'd like to expand on, and that there's something around the hybrid form as well that allows one to be more responsive to material, which I think really works for me. Like, and I love fiction, but anytime I'm still learning the craft of writing, and it's very hard for me to, whenever it goes from the page to the screen, like, how do you keep that sense of aliveness and stake? And I love that, and I love filmmakers who can do it in fiction, but I also know that I found the ability to do it by this hybrid form. So that's my aim, is to have more fictive elements in the next film, but still to develop this hybrid approach.
Amazing. And that's, well, you'll come back with us to chat about that. That sounds so exciting. Also, it's giving me real art vibes. Is it?
Real what?
Real art? Is it like the real
Like,
art?
oh no, I don't know.
Drama or authored works?
Yeah, I actually, because I mean, I still need to think about the funding model. I've been chatting to people a wee bit about it, but yeah, like, because this project didn't actually have any Arts Council money in it in the end, but I know that there's a lot of freedom in that too. But yeah, watch this space.
Yeah, you'll have to come back and chat with us. And congratulations.
Hopefully it won't take 6 years. Personal films take a long time. So I think that's partly what you're talking about, that processing. So hope I'd like to. I mean, 4 years is still a long time, but I think I could do that, just even if it was slowly.
Yeah. So yes, you'll have to come back and chat with us, and big congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for listening. So a big thank you to the Dinard British and Irish Film Festival for supporting this podcast. And if there's ever a time to like and subscribe to Film Ireland, it's right now, as next week, season 1 of the State of the Arts podcast, hosted by Des Doyle and supported by Screen Ireland, will be dropping on this channel. So in episode 1, he'll be chatting with Kin co-creator and Wheel of Time and Vikings director Ciarán Donnelly. So make sure not to miss out.